Hi there, it's Tracy, and this acrylic painting tutorial is going to show you how to paint shoreline treasures with acrylics on an 11 by 14 inch canvas. So let's go over brushes and colors before we begin. I will be using this sponge, and this is going to be helpful for the texture in not only the sand, but also the texture in the waves. So sponge is really helpful for this. If you don't have a sponge, you can try that same technique using like a bristle brush potentially, or even crumple up like a paper towel to get the texture, or you can skip the texture altogether and keep it simplified and not do texture. I also used a 3/4 inch wash brush and a number 4 round brush. These are Princeton Velvetouch brushes, and I like to use Liquitex Basics acrylics, so I'll be using Phthalo Blue, Primary Red, Light Pink, Burnt Umber, Turquoise Blue, Bright Aqua Green, Titanium White. Gold is optional. I use that a little bit in the texture of the sand, and raw sienna. If you want to simplify this color palette, you could potentially take out the primary, or you could actually take out the light pink and use primary red and make a light pink out of the primary red. You can also potentially not use the phthalo blue and just use the 2 turquoise colors, and gold is an optional color as well. Let's go ahead and get started. I'm using an 11 by 14 inch canvas, and actually you can do this on any size canvas. This design works pretty much on any size, any surface. Use a pencil to divide your canvas in two. Start in the upper right corner and go to the lower left and draw a wavy line. So this line is going to define our shoreline, and if you want to adjust the waves later, you can. This just gives us a starting point on where to paint our sand and where to paint our water. And I'm going to load my palette with 3 colors: Burnt Umber, Raw Sienna, and Titanium White. We'll be painting the sand first, and use a 3/4 inch flat wash brush. So this brush has already been loaded into the water and kind of tap dry. You don't want it too dripping, but you don't want it dry all the way. And you want to mix raw sienna and titanium white, so about equal parts of those 2 colors. I don't mix my colors all the way on the palette because I like when the color kind of varies and blends on the canvas. So I just take that color, start in the lower right corner, and we're doing, for the most part, big diagonal paint strokes that are going parallel to our shoreline. And our sand is going to gradually get darker as it approaches that wavy line. So we are blending in our raw sienna, and as I go to the left, I'm adding more raw sienna to the brush and allowing that to get darker and blend with that very light brown color in the lower right corner. So I'm doing wet on wet blending. That just means I'm blending this on the canvas. This is the transition zone here where that dark kind of meets the light. So if you brush over that several times, that's how you get that color to blend. And then let's grab our darker brown. So we don't even have to rinse our brush to get this darker color on here. It's okay if the other white and light brown mix with it too. That's fine. So I'm just taking that and I am outlining the edge of that shoreline. And again, we can adjust this later if you don't like the shape of that, or if you don't like the size of the waves. We can definitely still adjust that. Right now, this is where the dark part is. Some of the water is actually going to be going over this, so you'll kind of see what happens in that later step. And take this dark brown, and I'm going to fill that area in. So I kind of outlined it in that wavy direction, and then it eventually turned into more of the diagonal direction. And now I want to get that dark color to blend with my my raw sienna color. So I actually need more raw sienna on my palette to do this. So this is the transition zone. This is where dark and the raw sienna are meeting. So I'm going to take that color. I'm going to brush over it multiple times where it meets that dark, and that's how that blends. So if you're noticing that your raw sienna is taking over the dark brown too much, then you might need to just add more dark brown to your brush and blend that in with your raw sienna, that golden brown color. And I'm just going to blend dark brown with medium brown. And you don't want to over blend it because then it's just going to all turn the same color. So pretty much we want this gradient of dark brown on the left to very light brown on the lower right corner. I'm going to take a little bit more of this darker brown over here, kind of go over this wavy area. And so when you are done filling up the lower right half of this, rinse the brush off and we're going to transition to the water. We're going to need the color turquoise blue, bright aqua green, and we'll be needing titanium white that hasn't been already mixed with brown. So if you need to add some fresh titanium white to your palette as well. And a nice cleaned 3/4 wash brush. Make sure you rinse all that brown off of it because we don't want that. And also phthalo blue. So phthalo blue is optional. I'm only going to use this phthalo blue in the upper left area of the water. It's just going to give it that little bit of darkness in the upper left corner. If you don't want to use the phthalo blue, you don't have to. I'm going to take this color, start with the phthalo blue. This is the dark blue. And I'm just going to paint strokes that are parallel to the shore. So they are going diagonal, kind of curved a little bit towards the shore. I only did maybe a couple inches, not even, maybe like an inch down until I transitioned to the turquoise. So you can take the turquoise and the turquoise will blend very nicely with that dark blue color. Go down a few more inches with that turquoise and then start grabbing your bright aqua green. This is also a color that blends very nicely. And so that transition zone happens when that color changes. You want to brush over that part where the two colors meet and it will do wet on wet blending. So as I'm approaching the shoreline, I'm making my paint strokes go a little bit more wavy. They don't have to be the exact same kind of wave as that line that we created, but they are going in this kind of wavy direction. And then the closer you get to the shore, so if you're like a few inches away from that actual shore, start getting your white and blending your white in there. Let's see how it goes in this kind of wavy direction. And this is all wet on wet blending. I didn't rinse my brush yet at all. If you're finding that maybe it's like at this point it's not light enough because there's too much dark on your brush, then you might need to rinse your brush to do that. As you get to the shore, you want to do this, see how I'm kind of going over my brown a little bit, and it's kind of smearing that brown, because that brown is still a little bit wet. Ideally, it should be dry. We just want to be really careful. So we do want to have this white kind of overlap the brown a little bit, but not to the point where it's blending with it. So see how that white goes over it? We kind of want to get that sort of translucent look of the white over the dark, but we don't want it to blend. So see what's happening here? Because this brown is wet, it's actually blending with my white and making that edge turn light brown. And that's not what I want. So I'm just going to be really careful and not work that area too much. When we do the texture of the wave, it'll disguise some of that light brown if that's what happened. But I'm just going to kind of leave that alone. And then we'll be able to texture that later. What I am going to do is I'm going to kind of go back and add more shadows. So I'm going to rinse the brush all the way and grab just the dark brown. And right on the edge of this, where the very edge of the white is, I'm going to repaint this dark brown because I want to emphasize the shadow right here of the wave that's coming in. So right here, you can use the full width of the brush or you can just use the end of the brush. It doesn't have to be consistent, like the thickness of this doesn't have to be consistent throughout. I'm just making sure that this part is dark, so I'm just re-outlining the very edge of that white foam wave that we created. I can just kind of take that and maybe blend that in. Obviously, it's probably dry by now, that layer of brown I did, so it's not really blending with that, but I can just kind of take that and bring it out a little bit. So now we have the edge of that is nice and dark, and that's going to look really pretty when we do some of the texture of the wave that's going over it. We'll already have a shadow there. So next I'm going to rinse this off and I am going to do some texture work next. So this is a sponge. I haven't used this sponge since I did like a galaxy painting a few years ago. So that's why it has purple, blue, and black stains on it. But I'm going to use it for the texture in the sand. And I'm going to add gold to my palette. So this is optional, but adding the gold does give it like a nice kind of metallic look in the texture. And then some fresh raw sienna. I'll also be using burnt umber and white for this. So I'm going to warn you, we might have some shaky camera here just because I'm going to try my best not to shake the camera. But we really want to take this. I'm starting with the gold. And I'm just basically sponging this texture here with this sponge. And it kind of helps to sort of pinch the sponge so you can get into like different areas. So you can pinch the sponge, you can get like a variety of this. And we want to really kind of be careful here because I'm doing the dark brown. I don't want to lose the fact that the sand is light in the lower right part. So if I'm adding dark brown over that, I don't want to make it too dark. I still want it to look brighter and lighter in the lower right. So we can add dark texture there, just not a lot. We could add light texture in the dark area, just not a lot. And then in the middle, you can have like a combination of both. So I'm really just taking my sponge and all over texturing. You could actually like press and twist. I'm holding my canvas up so it doesn't shake the camera as much, but it's not as easy to do the texture while you're holding the canvas. It's actually way easier to do it when the canvas is flat on the surface of a table. So if you're actually working on an easel, you might find that it's easier to just put it down on your lap or on a table. And just keep adding. See, we get shaky camera because I'm pounding the sponge on the canvas. Just keep doing this. It does take quite a bit of time to do. Pressing, turning, do a variety. And it kind of, like I said, you want to do lighter texture in the lower right and darker in the upper left, but not too much dark in the lower and not too much dark in the upper, just so we can have that pretty kind of gradient still. It's almost like I'm going over the colors that I did, but then texturing the same color over that. We are going to do the white wave texture next, and I highly recommend just going and washing your sponge, just rinsing it off in the sink to rinse off the excess, the darker colors, because now we need just pure white to be able to do this. So we have a rinsed off sponge, and I'm kind of holding it, it's like I'm squeezing it so that I only have like a certain part of it, so I can kind of control the shape that I'm sponging. I'm taking my titanium white and just along the edge of that shoreline, and it's overlapping part of that dark brown. So remember we did that dark brown shadow? Well, that's the shadow for this right now. So we're having that go over that just a little bit. And I am sponging the little wave. It doesn't have to be completely opaque. If you see some of the water or some of the dark through, like see how it overlaps a little bit, and I can see a lot of that dark through some of the sponge, and that's kind of the point. And then some of the presses I'm making are a little bit lighter, like I'm just barely tapping the edge of the canvas, and some I'm pressing a little bit darker or a little bit harder. Next, I'm going to add a few more waves, and we didn't define these lines, so I'm just going to kind of make them up here. So there's one little sponged kind of wavy line, so I can just kind of sponge kind of like a curved line area with the white. You can take that and extend it maybe a little bit further. And then we can do maybe another one up here in the darker area. You could do more if you want, but it just kind of adds some interest in this upper left area, since that area is not going to really have cool seashells and starfish there. You can still add some other things in there that look interesting, like more waves or even bubbles. And speaking of bubbles, I'm going to take my 4-round brush. I'm just going to go in here and do like these little dots to kind of add some other visual interest in our ocean. So up here in the upper left, a few kind of scattered dots. Some are a little bit larger, some are a little bit smaller, and they're just in little clustered areas around the waves. We will need to let this dry before going on to the next step, specifically the sand area and all that texture, because we're going to be drawing the starfish and the seashell, and we can't draw that if the paint is wet. So let it dry and come back, and we're going to just go ahead and draw our seashore treasures. You are definitely welcome to change this up, change the position, add things, not do things. So this is completely up to you if you want to be creative about it. And I am going to start with the star in the lower right corner. I'm just using a regular piece of chalk and doing just a basic star shape. Maybe some of it's kind of hanging off the edge of the canvas. I'm going to do a kind of twisty shell shape. And this one, you can do like a little kind of teardrop shape. And then the twisty parts, we can take this, twist this out this way, and this one, and each one gets a little bit smaller and smaller, and goes to a point, and then we have like a little opening of the shell over here. If you want other ideas for different seashell designs, you can type in seashell clip art on Google, and it gives you a simplified seashell that you can kind of look at as a reference. A little bit more of a simplified drawing than a realistic photograph of a shell. So this one's just a basic kind of 2 diagonal lines, a curved arc on top, and then the bottom little curved parts on the bottom of the shell. This one's going to be a spiral sort of snail type of shell. So I just start in the middle, create a spiral, and it goes all the way around and to attach into a shape. And once you're done with your shell drawings, you want to go ahead and load your palette with some fresh titanium white, and we'll be using this number 4 round brush for the remainder of the painting. And because we are working on a dark background, we need to go ahead and paint over all of our shell and starfish pictures, drawings with white, so that we can get some good coverage here. So I am using titanium white, and I am just painting what I just drew. This is also your opportunity to really define your shape. So if you drew your shells and starfish kind of sketch-like, Now we are really defining that shape into a more permanent version of it. And that might mean that you're going over chalk lines, or it might mean that you're having chalk lines still show after you paint it in, and either of those are okay. I tend to have chalk lines that still show after I'm painting, and so after this painting's dry, we can erase the chalk lines with a clean wet paintbrush, so you don't have to worry if your chalk lines are still showing. So there's my starfish. And the nice thing about starfish is it doesn't have to be a perfectly shaped star. Each of the little points don't have to be perfect. They can be going at different angles, and that's fine, or different lengths. And then this little clam shell is like an arc with a point. So I'm defining that shape. As you're priming each of your shell shapes, you also don't have to fill it in solid white. So if you have maybe a little bit of the dark background showing through some of the white, that's okay. When you get to your twisty shell and also the snail shell, we want to kind of preserve some of the shape of these twists. So as I'm filling each of these little kind of curved pieces in, or these twisty pieces in, I'm leaving a little bit of space from the dark background still showing through, and that's still showing that kind of division line between each of the twists of the shell. So you can see that dark part that's still showing through, the slither of the darkness still showing through. And that's kind of important, especially when we go paint it in. It really preserves the shape of that so that we can get that twisty look in the shell. So this piece kind of goes to a point, and I'm actually going to simplify this little opening. I'm still going to leave like a slither of space showing between that, so that I preserve the shape of that shell. I'm going to do the same thing with the spiral of this. I'm going to just go ahead and paint a spiral, but see how I'm leaving that dark little line in there, so we can see that dark spiral, and that's going to be helpful when we paint that in as well. Next, we're going to paint the shadows of our objects. I'm going to rinse off all the white, and I'm going to need some burnt umber for this. And so we're going to take our brush. I'm actually going to water down the burnt umber just a little bit. It's not really watercolor consistency, maybe a little bit thicker than watercolor consistency. We want it to be very a thin layer of paint. So I'm going to just go on the bottom edges of my objects, starting with the starfish and then painting a shadowy area. So this does show up really dark over here because my sand is lighter in color. If it's too dark for you, you may want to kind of water it down a little bit to kind of thin it, or maybe just add just a touch of white into the brown so it's not super dark. And so the bottoms of the edges, I'm not going to do it on the top parts of the stars, just the bottom part. I'm going to go here to the shell, and I'm going to outline the bottom part of this shell as well. It's going to create kind of a curved area of shadow over here as well, but not on the top part, just the bottom. So like the shadow is casting towards the lower right. And so these two angles get shadow. And then our snail shell, same thing, just on the bottom part. I'm actually going to kind of push that paint out a little bit, so you see how I kind of let it fade out some more. So I take that shadow and kind of extend it a little bit further out, but dry brush this so it's a little bit see-through. It's almost as if the shadow just kind of fades away and gets lighter. We are going to rinse our brush off, and we're going to start painting the objects in. So ideally the white layers need to be dry before painting this in. However, if there's still a little bit of wet white, that's okay too. And this is Phthalo Blue. I'm going to paint my starfish this dark blue color. You are welcome to change the color of the starfish. If you want to do like a coral color starfish or an orange starfish, that's totally up to you. And so before I texture this starfish up, I'm just going to simply paint it blue. So I'm just going back over what I just painted with the white and I'm painting this blue. I'm leaving maybe just a slither of white on the furthest edge of the starfish. That helps to keep a little bit of the outline of the shape if you just keep a little bit of white still showing. And then I have some chalk that's showing as well. I can erase that chalk later after this dries. But pretty much just painting it solid blue. Kind of working my paint strokes in a star direction, different angles. And before this dries, I'm going to start texturing it. So, and without rinsing the brush, go ahead and load your brush in titanium white. And I'm going to make little dots starting at the top point of the star. I'm going to work my way down in this like a vertical direction down the top. And so I'm texturing it and I'm allowing the center of that point to be brighter. It shows up a little bit better right here. So you start in the middle. You do dots right down the middle of that star point. Go all the way to the center. Go back and just add a few more dots on the left and right of that. So you're not adding dots to all of that blue, just in the center. So you do down the center and then on the left and then like a row or two on the right. The center is brighter, left and right a little bit darker. So your white is blending with that blue. So you make a line down the center of that point and then add multiple little dots on the left and the right of that line. But you're not covering the whole thing with dots. I'm going to do it for this one. So do a line down the center with the little dots and then a few more on the left and the right. So that's going to give your starfish texture. I'm going to just add a few more brighter white dots just in the center right here. So that's very, very center of that starfish is lighter and it kind of gives it that three-dimensional look. I'm going to then rinse my brush off and re-outline my starfish. You don't have to do this, but I'm going to do this little touch up to it. I'm going to rinse. I'm going to grab just the blue. So very, very thin. So I'm kind of twisting my brush while I load it. And I'm just going to go back and kind of outline the edges of this so that I have a nice dark area along the edges. It did say that I left like a slither of white still showing. We can leave that if we like that, or we can go back over it with the dark, because the bottom would be kind of darker and shadowy, and the white dots that we did is that's making that starfish look kind of 3D, so the lighter part is closer and the darker part is closer to the ground. And then if you want to erase your chalk with a clean wet paintbrush, you can. Just be really careful not to smudge any of the wet paint. I'll be painting the shell in the upper right next, and I am using light pink for that. This is still the number 4 round brush. I'm just going to go ahead and paint over this shape with pink first. There will be some shading, and I'll be using brown for shading and white for highlighting. But for now, I'm just going to kind of outline the shape, this kind of arced fan shape, fill it in solid. I'm leaving the bottom part of the shell blank for now. So just the fan part painted in pink. And then without rinsing the brush, go ahead and grab white. I'm going to kind of twist that so I have a white part on my brush. It's not solid white, it's like white mixed with the pink, but it should show up lighter. I'm just going to do these lines, these kind of fan lines. There's several curved ones in the middle and then diagonal ones on the left and the right. And that's going to start to create that kind of bumpy look on the shell. I kind of overdid it because it ended up blending with the white or with the pink too much. And then this part right here, I'm actually going to paint those bottom parts in solid. So those are painted in. And that's showing up just a little bit darker because it doesn't have the white lines on it. I'm going to rinse and I'm going to use brown for my shadowing. So rinse and grab my brown. Maybe mix a little bit pink with the brown. It's not super dark. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to outline this little two diagonal lines down here. And then I'm going to take my brown and do these lines. So these are those kind of like curved lines. So these curves are going this way, and then in the center, the opposite way when it reaches the center. So it's doing the little ridges on the shells. And then I'm going to grab a little more pink on my brush, and I'm going to, on the edges of this, I'm taking this, maybe pink and white, so it shows up better. So I'm doing just little curved paint strokes to make this edge of the shell scalloped instead of a curved edge. And here I'm just taking some of that white and going back over some of these curves and kind of blending that down just to get that a little bit lighter on the edges. So next I'm actually going to rinse and kind of touch up the shadow on this clamshell. So rinse and then erase some of that chalk, but then go in here and kind of define the shadow a little bit more just on the bottom edges of this. Next, I am going to paint the twisty shell that's to the left of the starfish, and that one has the color primary red in it. I'll also be using the light pink and the white to blend colors. And let's start by mixing primary red and light pink. You're going to create this really pretty kind of coral color with that. I'm just going to start on the twist that's towards the top. And so let's start by doing kind of a dark area on the bottom, and we can kind of blend it wet on wet blending to lighter area on top. The trick with these twists is just to kind of change the color variation on the edges. So the edge might be dark and then the edge of the one twist that's next to it might be lighter just so it stands out. So on this, I made it dark on the bottom and light on the top. So I'm going to do this next twist part. So dark on the bottom, grab my white and do lighter on the top so that color variation stands out. This one is dark on the bottom, and then this is lighter on the top. So this one lighter on the top. Lighter on the top, and then dark on the bottom. And then, so I'm not even rinsing my brush to go from dark and light. I'm just loading my brush in one color, loading it to the next. And if it seems like it gets overloaded, you can always just kind of wipe the brush off a little bit. And you're just having the colors blend together on the canvas. The end little piece, I just did dark. Going back over these bottom parts, make them slightly darker. And then for the inside part of the shell that's kind of open, I'm going to grab just the light pink. So I still have those other colors on my brush, but this is the light pink, and I'm just going to paint a little bit at the top and then blend to maybe dark at the bottom, but leave the rest of it white. Maybe kind of blend that down a little bit, but I'm not going to render it much further. I'm going to keep it simple. A little bit more white on the inside. And then I'm going to go back and kind of go over the top parts of each of the twists with a little extra layer of white to kind of highlight that. Next, we're going to paint the snail shell, and I'm going to do that with turquoise. So I'm going to kind of revive the turquoise color that's on my palette already. And I'm just going to take this and start painting the spiral. And I am going to blend some other colors in this, make it kind of fun, maybe even blend some pink into it. I'm going to take my white, kind of do wet on wet blending. So I started on the outer part of the spiral, and I'm just going inwards. And I don't want to lose that spiral shape as I'm painting this in. I'm blending some of this darker blue towards the end and into the turquoise, since that dark blue blends very nicely with that turquoise. And then I'm going to rinse the brush and grab more titanium white and blend some more of this white. And again, we're painting in a spiral direction. We don't want to lose the shape. So I'm leaving that initial kind of dark line that we left, leaving it there. You can still kind of see it. And we can have some fun with this and blend some pink into our blue. So I'm going to wipe this off and grab some of the pink. I'm going to take this light pink color and blend this in. So we have these kind of tints of pink in there along with the blue. And I'm just going to go back and touch up my shadow on this one. So I'm going to rinse and grab the dark brown again and just go in there and do a little bit more shadowing kind of on the edges with the dark brown. And then I'm going to add these sort of dark brown pebbles throughout the sand area for visual interest. We can do this to kind of balance out the painting if we want, or just something else in the sand. So these are just different sized little brown circles kind of scattered throughout. We have some in the lighter area, some closer to the shore. And then when those little pebbles dry, you can go back with titanium white and you can do like little white highlight lines on each of the pebbles. If you have any leftover chalk from any of the drawing parts, you can erase that with a clean wet paintbrush. I'm going to do a few more kind of white dots up here, and also get the sponge and just add a few more texture little waves in the ocean area. For the most part, the upper left part of the painting is relatively plain, but that's okay. So I'm going to take my sponge and just go in here and maybe kind of touch up some more of the waves. And then maybe extend this a little bit more. And this is the conclusion of how to paint shoreline treasures. Hope you enjoyed this one. Thanks for watching, and thanks for painting with me.